Ladies and gentlemen, my name is TotalBiscuit. Every now and again, by which I mean every goddamn day, I get a comment something along the lines of, so you don't like pre-orders but you kickstart things. Don't you think that's a little bit hypocritical? Now, usually it's a warning sign whenever anyone says the word hypocritical or hypocrisy, because usually they don't know what it means, but it also means that people are, more often than not, trying to make a little bit of a logical leap, doing a few mental gymnastics here and there for a perfect three-point landing, and doing so, I don't really know why. Maybe it's just a desire to kind of get one over on somebody else, but anyway, regardless of the intention, I still think it's a valid question. I think we need to talk about Kickstarters, especially considering the recent situation that came about regarding a board game called Doom that came to Atlantic City. For those who don't know, this was a board game project, and it raised $122,000 with an initial goal of $35,000, with 1,246 backers. Now, the email went out to all of the backers that simply said the project is over, the game is cancelled, and they claim that every possible mistake that could have been made was indeed made, which included ego conflicts, legal issues, and technical complications. The question a lot of people are now asking is, are they going to get refunds, and is there some kind of legal protection for this? Now, of course, the FAQ of Kickstarter indicates that there is a legal obligation to fulfill your promises via Kickstarter, although Kickstarter themselves are not responsible for it, and once the money leaves Kickstarter and goes to the people itself, it's really none of their concern. They don't have any control over it, there's nothing they can really do, so they just kind of sit there and say, well, sorry guys, but there are no guarantees. Recently, Kickstarter had to put up a post that says Kickstarter is not a store, making it abundantly clear that you aren't buying things on Kickstarter, you are pledging money to a promise. You are pledging to a project that, hopefully, the guys behind said Kickstarter will do their best to fulfill, but Kickstarter offers no guarantees. What could you do legally to pursue a refund? Nothing that's all that practical, from what I can tell. It seems like the best option in this kind of instance would be a class action lawsuit on behalf of all of the backers, and it wouldn't surprise me if we eventually see that happen. There have been threats of it before, though it's not actually been executed yet, at least to the best of my knowledge. The problem is, what are you really going to get? If something like this gets cancelled, then the chances are a lot of that money has already been spent. It's not like there's $122,000 sitting in the bank account of these guys and like, well, it's over guys, sorry, we couldn't do it, and then they just run off with it. They aren't going to do that, and they've obviously already spent a significant chunk of it. This would hardly be the first time that mismanagement has resulted in all of the funds being exhausted. One of the more high-profile cases of that is, of course, Double Fine, who have managed to burn through their money by having, good lord knows what, problems happening. One assumes project mismanagement, feature creep, and things like that. And then, of course, got stuff like Code Hero, where they've clearly burned through their money and they're trying desperately to keep going, but they have yet to fulfill their promises. Long story short, you can sue, but you might not get that money back, yeah? And you're going to most likely have to spend quite a bit to even attempt it. So what's the point in suing someone that's already broke? Well, the answer is there isn't one. There's no real reason to do that. It's not going to benefit you in any way. So, I guess the question is, should you even be kickstarting at all? And more to the point, what's the difference between pre-ordering a game and kickstarting one? Why is one a good idea and one not? Well, firstly, let's get the idea out of the way that kickstarting stuff is necessarily a good idea. As far as I'm concerned, Kickstarter is something that should only really be used by people that have disposable income. There are way better things to spend money on, like games that already exist, for instance, things that you know are good and will actually give you entertainment value, rather than throwing money at something that might give you entertainment value 2 years down the line. Kickstarter is a very idealistic service. The idea is you can fund something that you want to be created, that wouldn't otherwise be created. That's the point of it. That's what it's for. And in terms of a crowdfunding system, it seems to have worked out fairly well. However, what's the difference between that and a pre-order? Well, it should be fairly obvious to most people. I'm actually surprised this is even an issue, but the fact is that when you pre-order something, you are paying for something that already exists, is going to come out, and you are doing it sight unseen, so you don't really have an awful lot of knowledge about what it's going to be. You only really know what the marketing material tells you, which is usually overblown, which is very embellished, and more often than not, is not necessarily representative of the product you're eventually going to get. The benefits of pre-orders are limited, to say the least, usually about 10% saving, which can range anywhere between about $1 to $5. Not really a big deal at all. And maybe you get a benefit, maybe you get a hat, maybe you get something out of that here and there, and in return for that, well, you give money before the game comes out, and you put yourself in a situation where you're more likely to buy the game than you otherwise would be, because you've already kind of committed to it. You've set yourself on the path of purchasing that game, and nothing that anyone else can say or do is going to stop you. You become more likely to ignore anything that dissuades you from picking the game up in the first place. You become driven by confirmation bias. I know this because I've experienced it myself in the past. A long time ago, what I'd used to do is, if there was a game that I was interested in and I had an intention of buying, I would look on Metacritic and I would read all the good reviews and I'd ignore all the bad ones. And the reason I do that is because I wanted someone to convince me. I'd look at the highest rated review and I was like, this is how I'm going to think. This guy gets it. And just ignore everybody else. It's surprisingly easy to do that, honestly, and it's not a very good idea. It doesn't give you the information that you need, and it puts you down a path to paying for something which, quite frankly, isn't very good and wasn't worthy of your money to begin with. That is a big concern. Very big concern. The most important thing to note about pre-orders is, regardless of whether or not you're pre-ordering, the game is going to come out regardless. More to the point, as much as people might say, oh, well, I want to support the developer by pre-ordering, how are you supporting the developer by getting a discount? If you really wanted to give money to the developer, you'd wait till it came out and buy it at full price. I don't know where that cut's coming from, but one has to assume that the developer is shouldering some part of it. I would think that Valve is probably taking a little bit off their share as well, but you're getting the game cheaper. You're not supporting the dev as much as you would have been if you bought the damn thing full price. So if you really want to support them, wait till it comes out, read a few reviews, and then buy the bloody thing. At least you can do it in the knowledge that the game is actually not a complete and total stinker. There's plenty of examples of titles that just pop out of nowhere and people are buying for no apparent reason. Citadels is a prime example. As I look at this, it's number 8 on the Steam charts. There is not a single review of that anywhere on the internet. That game is awful. Really, really bad, as you probably will have noticed if you watched my video today, and I hoped you did, because it is a dreadful, dreadful video game. People happily bought it regardless, though. So, there's plenty of reasons not to pre-order video games and not many reasons to actually do it. But when it comes down to Kickstarter, the reason you kickstart something is because it probably wouldn't happen otherwise. There are examples of games that have failed on Kickstarter yet have actually managed to come out anyway. Forge is a good example of that. Pretty decent deathmatch game, MMO-style combat, not too shabby. Failed on Kickstarter, managed to come out regardless, which is pretty cool. But there are plenty of others where they didn't. The game just never came out, unfortunately, as a result of not getting the Kickstarter funding, and usually the earlier on in the life cycle of a title the game is, the less likely it is to come out if it fails on Kickstarter. Stuff like Ravaged was going to come out regardless. You were kickstarting it to help them round out the game, flesh out the game, and actually pay for a bit of marketing, which was an interesting way of doing things, and it actually succeeded. And then, of course, there are things like Project Eternity, which, well, that wasn't going to happen unless it got the funding. Simple as that, really. So there you go. I think it's okay if you really feel strongly about something to support it with your money. I think that's absolutely fine. I think, however, that if you do not have that disposable income and you're not willing to get yourself into the mindset where you say, I have thrown this money away and I have no guarantees of seeing anything for it. If it comes out, great, yeah, that's fantastic, but I shouldn't assume that it will. I think you need to get into that mindset, and if you can, you're fine using Kickstarter. If you can't get into that mindset, I would never, ever in a million years recommend that you use Kickstarter. It's a risky proposition. You are an investor with no financial return, which, to be fair, is not much of an investor at all. More often than not, the prevailing view is that you are simply not an investor. You are a donator, you back a project, and you give money to it via a donation-based system. But yeah, that's what Kickstarter is. It's a cause-driven donation system. You donate based on a promise of something that might happen, not on something that necessarily will. Does it mean that the Kickstarter bubble has burst? Well, overall, we're seeing less money given to gaming projects lately, as far as I can tell. The top game projects are not earning anywhere near as much. Stuff like Satellite Rain almost didn't make it, which was quite surprising. It now most assuredly is going to make it as it rounds off its campaign over the next couple of days. But it nearly didn't get there. There was a surge in the last sort of 7 days that managed to push it past its goal, but I think that if we saw Satellite Rain a year ago, during the big Kickstarter frenzy, it would have probably earned twice as much. We're just not seeing those $4 million pledges anymore. War Machine Tactics is pretty close to that, but that's an established title. That is a big franchise by Privateer Press. War Machine is well known. And it looks like they've got some really good stuff going on. And obviously they've started developing the game already because they're able to show some really impressive assets. And that's currently at 1 million, and it's trending towards about 2. I mean, we're not seeing Project Eternity or Torment levels of support anymore. No $3 or $4 million projects. Even David Jaff's stuff is getting cancelled, for God's sake. Motorgun. That isn't happening anymore. It had a goal of $650,000, didn't even get a tenth of the way that before they just cancelled it and said, yep, this is not going to happen. So it would seem that this is a pretty bad time to be trying to use Kickstarter. There are not all that many game projects that are succeeding anywhere near as much as they used to. And honestly, I think that's probably a good thing. I think during the Kickstarter rush, there were many projects which succeeded, which had no supporting evidence whatsoever to suggest that they would ever actually come out. They were done by new developers, they were done by people that, quite frankly, didn't seem to really have any actual experience. They had grandiose ideas, and yet no explanation as to how they would actually achieve those ideas. And people weren't as skeptical back then as they are now. I think it's good that we've got that skepticism. I think Kickstarter is a great tool. I will happily kickstart something, I'll throw $15 at it, hope to support it. If it looks really promising and obviously has some good developers behind it with a really great concept, and I'm fairly confident that it's going to come out, I will promote it and say, hey, look at this looks really amazing, here's hoping it gets to where it wants to be. But I would never suggest that you ever kickstart a title unless you had that kind of disposable income available. You're basically throwing money at a promise. Is that fine? Yeah, I think so. Kickstarter is about as caveat emptor as you can possibly get, and while I think the Kickstarter website should be abundantly clear about that, way more so than they currently are, obviously it's in their best interest not to be, I think in the long run, they will lose out if they are not abundantly clear and just saying, look, this is not necessarily going to work out for you. You are pledging to something that we cannot possibly enforce. There is no guarantee this is going to come out. Please, 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 please don't do it unless you are absolutely okay with that money just disappearing into the ether and never being seen again, because it might happen. Yeah, there is a real likelihood. What I would say to developers that are using Kickstarter, and this is a personal opinion based on what I've seen of projects on there, is, for the love of God, be absolutely open about what you intend to do with the money. Explain why it's costing X amount. More often than not, we see numbers that are highly unrealistic. Either they're asking for too much, or they're asking for too little. I think that's a big warning sign whenever I see a game that's supposedly in the concept stages ask for $100,000. And I'm like, well, how big's your team? 10 people. How long's your development cycle? About a year and a half. How on earth are you going to pay for all of your guys for a year and a half with $100,000? That's barely anything, that's clearly not enough, and that's not to mention that there are way more expenses than just paying your staff. At that point, I would say, nope, they are deliberately lowballing, or they just don't understand how much it really costs to develop a title like this, which means that they're probably going to mismanage the project and it most likely won't come out. So in that situation, I would say to people, don't back that. I would like to see a breakdown. I think if you show a breakdown, then you show an understanding of how to manage a project like this. If you don't show a breakdown, then I have no idea as to whether or not you have any clue how to manage this amount of money, especially bearing in mind that we have seen time and again projects come out and say, well, we had no idea how much this stuff would have cost. It's amazing where all that money went. Even an experienced development house like Double Fine ran into exactly the same problem. You're talking about fees from Amazon, fees from Kickstarter, and then all manner of different things, including, of course, the notion of taxes that you have to bear in mind and consider, and all sorts of little things that you didn't anticipate. I want to see that you understand how much it really costs to make a video game. If you don't, I'm probably not going to back you. Secondly, I need an explanation as to how all of this stuff works. If you're promising something particularly awesome, that causes me to turn around and say, wow, that sounds amazing, I need you to explain how you plan on doing that in great detail. If you're saying, we're going to offer something that no other video game has done before, you better damn well tell me how, because usually if it was that easy, then other games would have done it before you. So tell me exactly how you intend to implement these amazing and fantastic systems and promises that you're bringing into play. If you don't, I'm probably not going to back your title. Thirdly, for the love of God, get a prototype going. I think it's way more likely that you're going to get funding if you actually have a prototype that you can show people, even if it's completely basic. Something like War for the Overworld is a great example. They had a prototype. It's like, this is what it's going to look like. Here are the very basic systems of how it's going to operate. Now look at that, I'm like, right, they have done some of the hard stuff. They clearly have a working framework here, and they got this done before they even asked for money. Fantastic, I am more likely to give money to them because I feel like they're taking this seriously, and they have already shown that they have at least a basic understanding of how their engine works and how to operate it properly. Also, a prototype will show that you understand the theme. If you want to make a game that's a spiritual successor to Dungeon Keeper, I expect it to look like Dungeon Keeper. There is a very specific look that Dungeon Keeper used, and I want to make sure that you understand what that is, because that indicates you have an understanding of what made that game good. You have an understanding of the essence. You have a passion for the project. Satellite Rain is a great example of that. It looks Syndicate-like, but brought bang up to date. That is exactly what I want, which is why I backed that project. War for the Overworld, similar thing. Thirdly, do update frequently, like every freaking day. I want to know everything. The more information you can throw at people, the more confident they will be that you're actually serious. I want to be able to dig into that information and research that project as thoroughly as possible before I drop money. That's especially true if I'm looking to drop a larger amount. If I want to drop on one of the higher tiers, one of those big whale tiers that most people don't do, that are only aimed at a very specific few people, then I need to be absolutely confident that your project is going to work out. Showing that you know where you're going with it is the most important thing, in my opinion, to convince me to do that. And the way that you do that is by continually updating with information and getting things out. And even if you succeed, then after that, it's important to keep the confidence of people going, and also start to build that hype train towards the actual release, because even if you manage to release the game based on that, you surely want to make another one, and going back to Kickstarter is not necessarily the way to do that. I'm sorry, but it's not. We're seeing a failure rate now in that respect. We're seeing games that really don't seem to be getting where they need to, even though it's a previous Kickstarter success. Massive Chalice by Double Fine raised significantly less. Currently, Project Ravensdale, which is by Black Forest, who actually released successfully the Project Guiana game, is currently trending towards 21% of its goal. That's not good. I mean, they are currently asking for $500,000, and they have nowhere close to that at this stage. The amount of backers they're actually going to need to raise that is extremely high. They are asking for more than 3 times what they were looking for last time, and they're not getting it, as you can see. There is no guarantee that you will be able to kickstart a second title after you do your first, so you better rely on selling copies to people. Being a popular title. And one of the ways that you do that is to make sure that people know about it and continue to know about it all through the development cycle. This also keeps confidence in your backers, so they don't suddenly start demanding refunds and throwing up a stink, because those stories spread very quickly, and confidence in your project can evaporate very quickly indeed if people even get a slighter sniff that you might not be delivering on your promises. In conclusion, I believe that Kickstarter continues to be a force for good in this particular industry. There are games coming out that would have never come out without Kickstarter. That is a fact. But I think perhaps the more important thing is that it's showing interest in genres that have previously been considered dead. This means that other developers may attempt to develop games within that genre. Suddenly, we get more CRPGs. Suddenly, we get more point-and-click games. We get more space exploration games. That's good. That's very, very good. Even if you've never kickstarted a game in your life, you will experience the benefit of Kickstarter existing. Shadowrun Returns is out because of Kickstarter. That would not have happened without it. FTL exists because of Kickstarter. Titles like Chivalry, Medieval Warfare, most of you probably don't even know that they actually had a Kickstarter. They raised $85,000. That's one of the reasons why the game is as good as it is. That actually funded duel mode. They promised that at $80,000, new weapons at $60,000, fisticuffs at $70,000. They delivered on all of those promises. It may very well not be all sunshine and roses, but at the end of the day, Kickstarter is currently a good thing for PC gaming, and hopefully it will continue to be that way. However, one should always remember the old axiom, caveat emptor, let the buyer beware. Assume that money will disappear, and you will live a happier life. I'll see you next time.